2007 Russia, Udmurtia. A small town called Glazov with a population of barely 100,000 people. Svetlana Starikova lived here, an ordinary middle-aged woman. It's late spring outside, a time of romantic hopes. In early May, Svetlana met an interesting and unmarried man and soon brought him home. But already at the beginning of June, on the 8th, the couple had a big argument, straining their relationship. The vodka they drank only added to it. Svetlana started making some household complaints to her man, acting as the mistress of the house. And Sergey, that was her boyfriend's name, really didn't like it. "Do you even know, you fool, who you're running your filthy mouth at?" With a single punch, he knocked the already quite drunk woman to the floor. Svetlana didn't even have time to react before brutal blows rained down on her. Martynov beat the woman mercilessly. He kicked the woman lying on the floor wherever he could. 1 blow, 2, 3, 10, he himself lost count of them. With frenzied force, he kicked the motionless body. The woman was no longer screaming or sobbing. All that could be heard was the dull thud each time his foot struck that shapeless, bloodied mass again. Having let off steam, the man calmed down a bit. Then, after catching his breath, he found a scalpel from the landlady's home first aid kit and plunged it into his partner's neck. The woman started wheezing and convulsed in her death throes. Gaping wounds appeared on her neck, blood spurted out, soaking the carpet. Sergey had hit a major artery. When Svetlana stopped moving, he leaned over her corpse. "Time to gut this old hen, Prabar Matalon. Thanks Sergey Martynov for getting rid of you, for freeing you from your meaningless chicken existence. At the same time, I'll give the local cops a puzzle. Let them rack their brains over who did this and why." He busily prepared a tray for himself, carving up his victim just like a good housewife guts a chicken. He split the breastbone in two and removed the internal organs. And finally he cut the skin off the chest. He handled the knife and scalpel very skillfully, despite his injuries and missing half of his fingers on his hands. The unfortunate woman who became yet another victim of the maniac that day did not know that her short-term partner was an experienced and cruel criminal, a maniac who not only took lives but also committed acts of desecration. Sergey Martynov, who would later be called the Butcher, the Cleaner, and the Wanderer. People would talk about him a lot. There would be interviews. I'll post extra materials in the Strashnoti Telegram channel. By the way, if you're watching this video on VK or other platforms, those are re-uploads and poor copies. Strashnota in its original form exists only on YouTube and Telegram. So, there will be a lot of talk about him, interviews will be conducted, people will be horrified by his bloody deeds and unprecedented cruelty. And people will start to wonder, as always, what makes him and others like him commit such terrible crimes. Now I'll try to take a brief look into the past and trace the life path of Sergey Martynov, the maniac traveler, from the very beginning. On June 2, 1962, in Nyazepetrovsk, a small town in the Chelyabinsk region, a young woman named Martynova gave birth to a child, out of wedlock, as they used to say back then. She conceived the child from some visiting man. Apparently he was from one of the southern Soviet republics, judging by the appearance of the newborn boy. The birth certificate listed a patronymic unusual for a Russian family, recorded at the registry office based on the single mother's statement. That's how Martynov Sergey Kashfulgayanovich came into the world. Dissatisfied relatives scolded their wayward daughter at every opportunity, saying she had shamed them throughout the whole district. Nothing good awaited Martynova at work either. After all, in such cases they could easily arrange a comrade's court or a reprimand through the trade union. Soon, because of the sidelong glances and mockery, it became unbearable for the young mother to stay in her hometown, and she went to Uzbekistan to work, taking her little son with her. Perhaps the choice of a new place to live was not accidental. And Martynova wanted to find the father of her child, but nothing is known for sure about this. After arriving there, she settled in the suburbs. She couldn't find a steady job for a long time and made ends meet with odd jobs. On the dusty eastern streets, Sergey Martynov received his first life lessons, often quite harsh, and picked up bad habits by imitating his mother's hard-drinking live-in boyfriends whom she brought home. The boy often got beaten by his mother's boyfriends, who were annoyed by the little child running underfoot. And his mother, who led a chaotic lifestyle, was not much of a protector for her little son. There was rarely any food in the house suitable for a child, and Seryoshka grew up like a weed, mostly on his own. Foul language became his habit, and cruelty became the norm of his life. Having learned the ugliest side of life too early, as he got older, Sergey had the worst reputation at school. He wasn't interested in studying. The teacher's lectures were met with stony silence and contemptuous smirks. The only activity he enjoyed was knife throwing. The older local boys taught Sergey how to play knife games, and Martynov was excellent at it. Barely finishing 8 grades at the village school, he didn't even get into vocational school. For a couple of years he scraped by somewhere, picking up odd jobs here and there. When he turned 18, he was drafted into the army during the fall draft. But military service didn't work out for Sergey either. The young man with southern blood was hot-tempered and willful. Army life, with its strict routine and rigid regulations, didn't suit him. Very soon, after getting into a serious conflict with the sergeant major, Martynov ended up in the disciplinary cell once, then again and again. Of course there were beatings, bullying and hazing, but Martynov was not the kind of person who would endure it and obediently clean dirty toilets with a rag. Somehow, with a hidden sharp shiv, he tried to fight back, cut someone, and ended up in the penal battalion. He was seriously threatened with a military tribunal, but Martynov deserted at the first opportunity. On the run, Sergey didn't shy away from robbery and banditry. The rush of a free, anything-goes life consumed him. He didn't even really hide, so in 1984 he was arrested and received his first 7-year sentence, which he served in an Uzbek correctional labor colony located in Uchkuduk. 3 wells, protect us from the sun. It was even tougher here than in the army, and Martynov, whether he liked it or not, had to bend to the new correctional system, which was unfamiliar to him. Apparently he was doing well, because just 5 years later, in 1989, Martynov was released on parole for good behavior. But as for getting on the path of reform, as it was written in the accompanying documents for every former convict, he had no intention of doing that at all. Back in the colony, Sergey met several radical Islamists, and as soon as he was released, he decided to get his revenge on the Soviet army by joining the ranks of the Mujahideen. These armed insurgents were fighting in Afghanistan against the Soviet military contingent. The servicemen of the Soviet Union were often inexperienced conscripts. In the war, thousands of young men died, returning home in zinc coffins, and Martynov was there too, but he wasn't shooting at the Taliban, he was shooting at his fellow countrymen. Sergey spoke Uzbek well, and Uzbek shares common roots with the languages spoken in Afghanistan, so it wasn't difficult for him to establish contact with the Afghans. It was the Afghan insurgents who showed Sergey real brutality, which he quickly embraced. Radical Islamists dealt with their enemies very simply. They mercilessly destroyed them in the name of Allah. But before that, the infidels had to be tortured for as long as possible. And the Mujahideen very rarely killed Soviet prisoners right away. A quick death was considered a reward, not a punishment among them. Before sending prisoners to the next world, they were brutally tortured. One of the most sophisticated tortures was the red tulip. The drugged prisoner of war had the skin on the back of his head cut and turned upward. When the effects of the drugs wore off, the person experienced incredible agony, then began to go insane from the pain shock, and only after some time would die. And this was just one of the many brutal tortures in the arsenal of the Mujahideen. When Martynov was first offered the chance to personally deal with one of the Soviet soldiers to test his suitability, he did not disappoint and gladly took on the task. After several hours of horrific torment, the captured soldier died, bleeding out. The Afghan insurgent grinned approvingly, looking at the work of his Russian protege. Having completed the task, Martynov was filled with confidence. He always carefully wiped the bloody knife. He was not bothered by the suffering of others, nor was he concerned about the spilled blood. He never felt pangs of conscience when torturing and taking people's lives, as he himself admitted many years later in an interview with one of the capital's newspapers. The pungent smell of human blood with hints of cold metal awakened the basest, most animal instincts in him. It was the only thing that truly gave Martynov pleasure. To feel how the doomed, cornered victim trembles in their death throes. Back then in Afghanistan he was simply doing his job, for which he was well paid. And there was only one point on which Sergey disagreed with the Mujahideen. No one has any power over him, not God, not Allah, not even man. He only believed in himself and decided for himself who would live and who would die. And for a while, Martynov felt that fate had given him all the cards he needed to carry out these intentions. But in one of the battles with Soviet soldiers, a grenade with the pin pulled was thrown into the Mujahideen squad. There wasn't much time to think. Martynov caught the grenade in midair. He only had time to turn his face away. The grenade started to explode right in his hands, tearing off the upper phalanges of half the fingers on both hands. 3 on the left and 2 on the right. He was saved from pain-induced shock by substances that the Mujahideen had in abundance. Sergey was swearing loudly in helpless rage, looking at his stumps, which were just a bloody mess. The Mujahideen, in recognition of his combat merits, gave Martynov time to lick his wounds. Herbal tea mixed with drugs helped especially. That way he didn't feel any pain at all. Everything that was happening seemed shrouded in a haze of intoxication. But now he was no fighter at all. And at one point, after recovering a bit, he ran away from the Taliban toward the Soviet border. Before his former comrades could kill him, a cripple who had now become a burden to them. The main thing now is to reach Uzbekistan. And there he was already like a fish in water. It was 1990, and in 1991 Martynov was already in Abakan Kakas Autonomous Region. There he settled with a kind-hearted old lady in an area of private homes. A low-income large family lived nearby. The children were left to themselves because their parents were heavy drinkers. Sergey often watched these kids and remembered his own childhood. The children soon got used to the neighbor sitting on the bench near the house. He behaved quietly and didn't attract much attention. One autumn day, when the adults had gone about their business, only the neighbor girl, about 12 years old, was left at home. She was a little sick, so her grandmother allowed her to stay home from school. But it was a nice day outside and the girl didn't want to stay cooped up. She went out into the yard to get some fresh air. On the bench, as usual, Sergey Martynov was smoking. He watched the child closely from under his bushy eyebrows. "Why aren't you in school?" Uncle Seryoja suddenly asked the girl. "My stomach hurt," the neighbor girl answered timidly. "Did Grandma let you skip school today?" "That's right." Martynov grunted approvingly and his eyes flashed with a predatory gleam. "There's nothing to do there. I went through 8 grades from bell to bell, just wasted my time." The girl thoughtfully traced the dried grass with the tip of her shoe. "Why are you standing there like a stranger?" Martynov asked her in a coaxing voice. "Sit down. There's enough room for everyone here." The girl sat down reluctantly, since she was used to obeying adults. Sergey put his arm around her, tousled her unruly curls, and then, as if by accident, left his hand on her shoulder. "Wow, you've grown so much in just half a year, you're almost a bride already," Sergey whispered slyly. "I bet suitors are lining up for you, aren't they?" The girl blushed deeply, embarrassed by such questions, and Martynov kept whispering all sorts of compliments in her ear, which gradually turned into outright indecencies. She would have been glad to move away from her suddenly unpleasant neighbor, but he gripped her shoulder like iron pincers, pressing her to the bench. His breath was hot and smelled unpleasantly of tobacco and alcohol. Sergey's other hand began to greedily grope the fragile girl's body. The girl froze, scared stiff, and from the terror that gripped her, she couldn't utter a single word. She couldn't even scream, even though there was no one else at home. Martynov dragged his victim into the yard of her house, roughly threw her to the ground, pinned her down with his full weight, tore her clothes, and raped her. When he finished his dirty deed, he picked up a large stone from the ground and, with several blows to the head, took his victim's life. "This will be a lesson for you and your miserable mother," he said cold-bloodedly. He took the corpse to the master's cellar. It was cool there, and the unpleasant smell wouldn't appear so soon. The family didn't realize it right away. At first they thought she had stayed late at one of her friends' places. But when the night grew late and the child still hadn't returned, the grandmother ran to the local police officer. He lived nearby. The police officers in the house were already asleep, and the woman had to bang on the fence and shout under the windows for a long time before the lights came on. "Who could be here at this hour?" the elderly officer asked sternly, looking out the window. "Mikhail Stepanovich, it's me!" The desperate woman shouted in a hoarse, breaking voice. "We're in trouble!" "What happened?" asked the police officer, who came out a couple of minutes later. "Oh, trouble has come!" the guest wailed again. "All right, stop crying," the officer commanded. "Tell me everything in order. What happened?" "My granddaughter is missing," the woman exclaimed. "We've already been to all her friends' houses. She's not with any of them." The police officer, after listening to the details of the child's disappearance, started the service motorcycle parked in the yard and went to the station to call for backup from there. The police squad arrived with police dogs. After an hour of searching the area, the child's body was found in a cellar with preserves, covered with some kind of cloth. In the small settlement, everyone knew each other, and among the strangers who could be suspected of such cruelty, there was only Martynov. Sergey was found quickly while trying to cross the regional border, and he didn't even try to deny it. In the summer of 1992, Martynov was sentenced to 15 years of high-security imprisonment. He had a hard time in the colony because those who commit abuse, especially against those under 18, are really not tolerated there. The already cruel Sergey became even more hardened, and on top of that, he developed active tuberculosis. In 2004, Martynov was granted parole for good behavior after serving 12 out of his 15-year sentence. Once he was released, he started drinking heavily, and he began dabbling in illegal substances again. The criminal was angry at the whole world, but he blamed not himself for all his troubles, but the overly zealous cops and the cruel fate that had deprived him of his fingers. "I'll show you yet." He would often mutter under the influence and shake his fist at the air. You'll remember Sergey Martynov yet. One evening, an idea ripened in Sergey's mind, and the next morning he immediately set about putting it into action. From that moment on, Martynov no longer lingered in one place for long, taking into account his previous mistakes. Sergey never had any problems finding a place to spend the night. He knew how to deal with women, especially older ones who drank. He used his physical condition and the absence of fingers to play on their sympathy. There was a thunderstorm back then. Martynov would tell everyone the same story. Ah, the wire was cut by high voltage, you see. Half the village was left without power. Well, there was nothing to be done. I had to climb up and fix it, but the guys didn't turn off the power to the wire. And I got shocked. And those so-called doctors couldn't save my fingers, so they cut them off. Oh my God, what a tragedy. The sympathetic, trusting women for whom this true story, one that can't be kept quiet, was meant, sighed with compassion. Well, it's all right. I've gotten used to living and working even with these stumps. See how skillfully I hold the knife in my hands. Not everyone with fingers can do that, Sergey boasted, grinning smugly as he skillfully twirled the homemade knife in his hand. His female companions were amazed by the strength of spirit of this man, whom even a serious injury did not turn into a miserable invalid. He didn't complain, didn't look for sympathy, he just talked about the misfortune that had happened to him. And there was something sadly romantic about it, which absolutely everyone fell for. Old ladies pitied him in a motherly way. Younger women sympathized with him and opened not only the door of their home to him, but also their hearts. And children saw no threat in the disabled man. Besides, he was modest and quiet in public. This completed the image Martynov had created of a humble hard worker and a quiet man. Only a few people knew what kind of beast came out when, under the influence of alcohol or drugs, Sergey lost control of himself. In reality, the polite and at times even gallant Martynov felt nothing but the deepest contempt for the women around him who drank. If he was sober, he managed to hide it, but under the influence, any rude or simply unpleasant word that he didn't like would set him off. Alone with his next victim, he saw little need to wear the mask of decency. Booze is evil. That's what made him unstable and very aggressive. So outwardly quiet and unremarkable, electrician Sergey didn't arouse anyone's suspicion for a long time and only snapped in 2005. While in the city of Kemerovo at that time, he noticed a girl about 14 years old in a park not far from his latest place of residence. She was sitting on a bench, and there was no one nearby. Martynov quietly approached her with a bored look. "Why are you all alone at such a late hour?" he asked the teenager. "Waiting for someone, aren't you?" "No," she replied, confused. She hadn't heard him approach. "I just had a fight with my friend. We were here together, but she got upset and left." Martynov didn't need to know anything else. He heard everything he wanted. With a movement honed by years of training, he pulled a straight razor from his sleeve, which he always carried with him. "Now you're going to be a good girl and do everything I tell you," he said with a clear threat. "Do you understand?" The girl, trembling all over, stared at the shiny razor blade without looking away. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they didn't move the criminal standing in front of her at all. Martynov tried to sexually assault the victim, but she suddenly began to resist desperately and scream. Then Martynov, afraid that the girl's screams would attract someone, slashed her face with a blade as hard as he could and then ran away. She was found bleeding heavily right there in the park. The scoundrel thought the girl would die from severe blood loss, but he was wrong. The girl survived and gave incriminating testimony. Martynov was caught shortly after. But for some unknown reason, he was only placed under a travel restriction. Once free, the criminal immediately disappeared, after which he was put on the federal wanted list. Who thought it was smart to release him under a travel restriction? The Kemerovo prosecutor was furious when he was informed about what had happened. The investigator just shrugged and mumbled something about the judge's decision and the lack of grounds for detention, and the subsequent measures taken to search for Martynov, which for a long time yielded no results. Despite the active search, he managed to successfully hide for a whole 5 years. The fake documents in the name of Sergey Mikhailovich Konstantinov, which his prison buddies arranged for him, helped a lot, so he freely traveled across the vast expanse of the motherland without fear of being discovered. He mostly hitchhiked and used local transit. That way he didn't have to show his passport any more than necessary, and there was no way to trace his movements through ticket records. He preferred to stay in small settlements, never staying long in any of them. It is known for certain that he killed Svetlana Starikova, who was mentioned at the beginning. And right after Udmurtia, at the end of June that same year, Martynov was already in the Nizhny Novgorod region, where he settled in the village of Vyazovka. In the Kstovsky district, he got a job as a temporary worker at one of the private construction sites. His employer was a former police officer who trusted the hired workers working on his site so much that one day, on June 28, he left his 8-year-old daughter with them for a while when he had to leave urgently on business. And of course, the maniac did not miss such a perfect opportunity. "Do you want to go to your daddy?" Martynov asked in a friendly tone as he approached the little girl. The little one nodded happily. She didn't like the surroundings and wanted to leave as soon as possible. Sergey reached out his hand to the girl, and she trustingly placed her little palm in his, not even afraid of the rather scary injured stump. Martynov easily led the schoolgirl to the outskirts of the village, where they boarded a bus. Initially, he planned to demand a ransom for the girl because he knew her father had money. But after reaching the forest area near the city of Dzerzhinsk, Sergey changed his mind. He got out together with the girl and led her into the dense thicket. "Is Dad here?" the little girl asked in surprise. Martynov didn't answer. He was breathing heavily and now looked at the child in a completely different way. For several hours, the man abused the girl in various ways, including sexually assaulting her multiple times. And then, when he got bored of her, he tied her to a tree and left her in the forest, hoping she would die. But the girl miraculously survived. Torn and tortured nearly to death, she was found purely by chance by some mushroom pickers. Mother of God! What kind of monster could do such a thing? Her rescuers were outraged. Even the experienced doctors who gave the girl first aid were shocked. The victim was hospitalized in the nearest hospital, and Martynov was once again put on the federal wanted list. But he didn't waste any time and went to the Sverdlovsk region. He chose Yekaterinburg as his new home. There he met another down-and-out woman, a former poetess named Iraida Solomenina. Being a romantic by nature, Iraida was immediately touched by the heart-wrenching stories about lost fingers in an unequal struggle with electricity. Solomenina, like many other women before her, willingly took in the wandering electrician, hoping that the man would become not only a good neighbor, but also the knight of her heart. The woman was actively making plans for a happy life together. Soon this began to seriously annoy her partner. At one of their dates, already in March, when the slightly drunk Iraida once again started sharing her romantic plans with Martynov, Sergey rudely interrupted her. "What the hell were you thinking, you old bag? Do you think I'm going to sit here with you forever? After what happened between us, you are simply obliged to marry me like a true gentleman," Iraida said flirtatiously, the woman emboldened by alcohol. "Oh, really? I'm not going to marry you," her partner snapped, abruptly jumping up from the table. "I'm still in my right mind. I'm not about to get myself into that kind of trap. Today I'm with Masha, tomorrow with Glasha. I'm as free as the southern wind." "Dog!" Iraida screamed and dug her nails into his arm. Sergey slapped her hard across the face. The woman's head jerked to the side like a rag doll's. She lost her balance and fell backward with the chair, hitting her head hard in the process. Martynov grabbed a knife from the table and finished off his unlucky partner with several blows, then, in a drunken frenzy, brutally mutilated the body, as was his habit, by removing the internal organs. And after that he calmly went to sleep. After waking up, Sergey packed his things and left the region. and this time he went to the Vladimir region. The order's new residence was a church in Vladimir. Here he mingled with other beggars seeking shelter in the church. But soon a conflict arose between him and the novice Sergey Martynov. The latter suspected Martynov of theft and showed his distrust toward him. In May, Martynov got tired of hearing this and decided to run away from the monks, but before leaving, he wanted to score a good haul. On that day, Martynov happened to be on duty at the parish. He had the keys to the parish cash box. Martynov approached him and put a knife to his throat. "Give me the keys now, or I'll cut you like a pig." "Fear the Lord," the novice replied. "I'm not worried about myself, but about your sinful soul." "No need to worry about me," Martynov smirked. "God and I have our own score to settle. Don't take sin upon your soul," Martynov continued humbly. "You phony holy men make me sick," Martynov spat. "You pretend to be saints, but you rob the people worse than the worst thieves. At least those guys honestly admit they're thieves, but you hide behind God, and your God isn't any better. He takes cash and bank transfers too. Your priest is completely corrupt. He barely has time to change his cars. You're the real bandits in cassocks. Don't blaspheme," the novice snapped. He could have endured a personal insult. Oh, how sensitive we are. Don't play the hero. "No one will canonize you as a saint for this anyway," Martynov mocked the novice. "And don't squeal like a pig, your little God still won't hear you." "And do you know why?" "Because he doesn't exist." "I know that for sure. If he existed, he wouldn't allow the atrocities that people commit. He would at least have mercy on little children and protect them, but just look at what's happening in the world. There is no end or limit to human suffering. And where is your loving and almighty God? Where is he looking right now? And all you do is bang your forehead in vain with all your bows and empty prayers." Bryukhanov didn't say anything else. "No, I can't get through to you," whispered the novice. "The demons have already taken your soul, that's why there is no God for you." Martynov's dark eyes flashed at him, and the droop of his bushy eyebrows had an unhealthy gleam. He quickly stabbed his new victim several times. The body went limp and collapsed to the floor. Sergey greedily started searching the dead man's clothes, but he never found the coveted keys. He cursed and kicked Bryukhanov's lifeless body. "Why would you need cash register keys in the afterlife?" "Well, no one has ever just walked away from Sergey Martynov." The criminal calmly went to the construction site at the nearby monastery, where he worked part-time, and while no one was looking, he took some tools from there. After returning to the small church, he broke into the cash register and the room used for preparing for services, and scraped out all the money and valuables from there. "God gave, God took away," Martynov laughed at his own joke. Taking along a couple of workers from the construction site, whom he had become friends with, Sergey took a taxi and, as always, went off to party in another region. The next stop on his bloody route was the Uglich district of the Yaroslavl region. There he once again met a lonely woman who was not living the best lifestyle. It was with women like this that Martynov found it easiest to strike up close relationships, so he could move in with them as a live-in partner without any obstacles and with everything already prepared. Nadezhda Rogozina became deeply attached to her acquaintance. But Martynov soon got bored in this little town and decided to leave, which he told Nadezhda. "It's dead around here." "I have to leave," Sergey muttered through his teeth during a date by the tree line. "Seryozha, don't leave. Stay, please." The woman pleaded, clinging to him with a death grip. "Stay for me, we'll live together. Why would I need you?" Martynov smirked, pushing away the woman's plump arms with disgust. "Have you seen yourself in the mirror?" The woman was taken aback. She hadn't expected such an answer, since up until the very end Sergey had been quite gallant with her and had shown her all sorts of attention. "So you were just messing with me all this time." You were lying, she suddenly realized. Ha ha, you finally got it, you fool, her former fiancé smirked crookedly. What a bastard, you scum, the woman screamed and started hitting her offender's chest with her weak fists. Nadezhda didn't even notice the knife in Martynov's hand. She only felt a dull blow and a sharp pain in her stomach. Then another blow and another. That was a mistake, Sergey hissed and kicked his former lover as a parting gesture. Martynov left Rogozina's body in a visible spot, not even trying to hide it. He caught the nearest passing car and went to the Oriol region. There he settled in the village of Znamenka. And again it was the same scenario. In a local bar, Martynov met a Pentecostal woman, 50-year-old Galina Olenicheva, and he told her his made-up story about the former exploits of a daring electrician who, risking his own life, restored the electricity supply in the village. Galina immediately felt warmth toward the stranger with such a tragic fate. She wanted to comfort him, feed him, and give him shelter. Well, as for Sergey, of course, he didn't mind and gladly accepted her invitation. They lived together for a while. They also got drunk together. But one unfortunate day, Galina made the mistake of calling her partner a jerk. "Who the hell are you talking to like that, you bitch?" "Who did you call a jerk?" Martynov shouted like a madman. "Of all things, I was never a snitch. I've killed people for less." Galina was about to laugh, but after looking at her partner's expression, for some reason she immediately lost the desire to. She realized that she didn't know the man standing in front of her at all. In front of her was a real predator thirsty for blood, and Lenicheva stepped back, but it was already too late. Martynov was already approaching her with a knife in his hand. He suddenly thrust out his hand and delivered a precise blow straight to the heart. The woman only gasped and stared in confusion with glassy eyes at her beloved. When the knife sank in up to the hilt into human flesh, slipping past the ribs, Sergey savored the moment and twisted the blade. Now he was sure that this woman wouldn't survive. Galina immediately collapsed, sliding down the wall. Martynov pulled out the knife. On the floor in front of Martynov lay another lifeless body, and Sergey had already lost count of how many there were, because he wasn't keeping track. Didn't like something? Right away a knife in the side. He stepped over the corpse of his companion, calmly gathered his belongings, making sure to grab the landlady's money and some valuables, and left the city. Until 2010 nothing was heard about Martynov. In any case, similar crimes committed by the elusive fingerless butcher before that did not appear in police reports. Sergey continued hitchhiking and eventually reached the city of Gryazy in the Lipetsk region. Here he met a homeless alcoholic, Yevgenia Glazunova, with whom he spent some time drinking alcohol. Another drunken quarrel became a turning point in Glazunova's fate. "You're not a real man at all, you can't even get it up," Yevgenia said to her suitor. Martynov's eyes filled with rage. A storm cloud settled over him. Telling the woman he was going to step away to pee, Sergey went to look for a suitable weapon for the crime. He came back fairly quickly. Glazunova didn't even have time to gasp when Sergey hit her on the back of the head with a crowbar. She couldn't defend herself because she was very drunk. Her arms and legs wouldn't obey her, and she barely understood what was happening. From the strong blow, she immediately lost her balance. And Martynov, having smelled the scent of blood, was already raging and couldn't stop himself. He dragged the woman to a nearby railway post, tied her up with a rope lying there, and then carried out exemplary execution. He beat Yevgenia on the head and other parts of her body until she stopped showing signs of life. And even after that, he kept hitting her, turning the woman's face into a pulp. "You say it's not worth it, but now it really is." Sergey shouted, spraying saliva. After this crime, Martynov went to Bashkiria. Here he settled in Ufa with 70-year-old Tamara Andreevna Sadikova. The old woman, like everyone else, felt sorry for the fingerless wanderer with a difficult fate and took him in. For a couple of months, Sergey lived the life of a modest hard worker and didn't give himself away in any way. But by August, he was completely fed up with the old woman's moralizing. Sadikova tried to lecture Martynov in a motherly way and gave him what she thought were wise pieces of advice. But this really annoyed Sergey. When Tamara Andreevna started her usual nagging again, Martynov lost his temper. "Why can't you just leave it alone, old woman? You're always sticking your nose into everything." "Did anyone ask you to give advice?" Sergey snapped angrily. The elderly woman couldn't even find anything to say in response. She never expected such a reaction from the always calm and polite tenant. "Why are you staring at me like that? You don't like being spoken to like that? Well, you don't deserve any better. You've been getting on my nerves for ages. You keep nagging and nagging all the time. That's why your son ran away from you, and he did the right thing. But don't worry, I'll free him from such a burden." With these words, Martynov grabbed a knife from the table and stabbed the lady of the house several times. The woman was already showing no signs of life. The woman was already dead, but Sergey still wouldn't stop. Sadikova's body was riddled with numerous stab wounds. Blood was everywhere, thickly flowing from the many gaping wounds. But even that wasn't enough for Sergey. He tore the underwear off the already dead Tamara and violated her lifeless body. Then he started searching the house for valuables. Sadikova lived modestly, so besides a cell phone, a video camera left by her son, and some clothes, there wasn't much else to take. Martynov reassured himself, thinking, "Beggars can't be choosers." He was about to leave. But then a wild thought flashed through his mind. Sergey had been traveling around Russia for more than 5 years, and no one had ever stopped him even for a routine document check, let alone anything more serious. Although he didn't really try to hide and didn't even wipe his fingerprints. Impunity made him feel he could do anything, so Martynov felt invulnerable and elusive. Catching another wave of excitement, he decided to write a message for the son of the old woman whose life he took, and for the cops who haven't been able to catch him for so long. As a result, Sergey left 2 notes at the crime scene. One of them said, "Cops, I'm not afraid of you. I'll be in Chelyabinsk at 12 o'clock. There won't be any bodies for now." And in the second one there was a message for Tamara Andreevna's son. "Sergey, you're a good guy. Sorry for what I've done here. Now you have to live with it. I freed you from the burden. God bless you." Of course, Martynov didn't go to Chelyabinsk. He wrote this intending to confuse the police and tease them once again, since he felt superior to them and considered himself much smarter and more cunning than everyone else. In September, the traveling maniac appeared in the Semiluksky district. Here he met Nadezhda Chistyakova, and everything followed the same old pattern. This woman annoyed him because she was seriously ill and often complained to her neighbor about various symptoms. Martynov at first listened to her complaints and seemed to sincerely sympathize, but after a couple of weeks he got tired of this constant whining. When Nadezhda once again started groaning and sighing, complaining about her ailments, Sergey grabbed a belt from his pants and began tightening it around her neck. "What are you doing? You're hurting me!" the victim screamed, trying in vain to break free. "Hold on a little longer. It has to be this way. You have to die because your life is worthless. Now I will free you from your suffering forever." As if nothing had happened, the man who seemed so kind answered her. Martynov squeezed the improvised noose he had made from a belt tighter and tighter around the victim's neck. Chistyakova began to wheeze, and the sound of breaking laryngeal cartilage could be heard. The woman kicked her legs in her death throes and then went limp in the killer's hands. After robbing the place, Sergey set off to continue his journey. This time, he didn't leave the region. and he settled in the village of Novaya Usman in the same region, where he got a job as an electrician and a handyman at the roadside cafe Jambul. The owner was Kazakh, so Martynov, who spoke Uzbek and many of its dialects, had no trouble winning over both the management and the staff. Here, Sergey was quiet and diligent, so as not to attract any criticism from the management. The police only caught up with Martynov 2 months later, when the phone belonging to Sadikova, whom he had killed, appeared on the network. The signal was coming from the Novusmansky district. Martynov didn't know about the possibility of remote phone tracking and started using it as intended. Late in the evening on November 19, 2010, the police came to the Jambul cafe. Nothing hinted at what was coming. Martynov was sleeping peacefully after his shift in one of the living quarters attached to the cafe. All eyes of those sitting in the cafe were fixed on the unusual visitors. At first, the staff thought that the officers had just come in for a bite to eat, like everyone else. "Hello, can I help you with anything?" asked the man standing at the register. "Does Sergey Martynov work here?" the policeman asked sternly, without any introduction. "No, we don't have anyone by that name," the cafe worker replied without hesitation, since he only knew Sergey by a fictitious surname. "Have you seen this person here?" asked the other officer, showing a composite sketch of Martynov. The man behind the counter looked closely at the black and white photo. Staring back at him was a man who looked painfully similar to their electrician, Sergey. "He looks like our electrician," the cafe worker said uncertainly. "Does your electrician have all his fingers?" the policeman asked. "No," the man replied, confused. "He's missing several fingertips on both hands." He said that while installing a power line, he got a strong electric shock and had to have them amputated. "Then that's definitely our guy," the policeman replied dryly. "Where is he now?" "Over there, behind the cafe. We have a guest house attached. He sleeps in the far room," came the reply. Police officers, or maybe back then they were still called militiamen, or maybe they were already police officers. Write in the comments. Well, in general, the law enforcement officers of the Russian Federation headed straight there, accompanied by one of the cafe employees. And Sergey Ril was peacefully sleeping there, and when he was woken up, he did not resist at all. Martynov was found with a knife and Sadikova's phone. "I'm very tired," was all he said. "You should have just killed me right away and not arrested me." Thus ended the bloody harvest of one of the most dangerous and long-sought criminals of the Soviet and post-Soviet era. Later, Martynov actively cooperated with the investigation, entering into a pre-trial agreement and eagerly talked about his criminal exploits. By the way, Sergey himself claimed during interrogations that he didn't know exactly how many people he had killed, but insisted that there were definitely no fewer than 15. However, they were only able to prove and charge him with 8 of them. On November 9, 2012, the Voronezh Regional Court sentenced Sergey Martynov to life imprisonment. Martynov reacted calmly to the sentence. "I repent and regret what I have done," he said at his trial. "I consider the sentence to be fair." To this day, Sergey Martynov is serving his sentence in the strict regime correctional colony White Swan in the city of Solikamsk, Perm Krai. The criminal is kept in a solitary cell because he has repeatedly expressed a desire to take the lives of his cellmates and even specifically asked for someone to be placed with him so he wouldn't lose his skills. In the first years of prison, he seemed to have found faith in God and became interested in orthodoxy. Strangely, none of the relatives of his numerous victims ever filed a claim for compensation for the moral damage he caused them. There were also no incidents from the public during the court hearings. The trial of the terrifying maniac proceeded very quietly and calmly. Just like Martynov himself, who pretended to be a respectable and peaceful citizen most of the time. Nevertheless, Sergey Martynov is one of the most brutal and cold-blooded criminals in the post-Soviet space. His personality was shaped by emotional and physical abuse from early childhood. Neglect, aggression from his mother's partners, poverty and isolation. He learned cruelty as the norm early on. He had no empathy, and violence became both a tool and a source of pleasure for him. Among his key personality traits were sensitivity without emotional response. He felt no sympathy for the victims or their suffering, even when it came to children. Psychopathy. A complete lack of guilt, remorse, and inner moral conflict. He acted with predatory self-confidence, often deliberately and cold-bloodedly. Sadism. In a number of episodes, he not only took lives, but did so with obvious pleasure. He tortured, tormented, and dismembered his victims, cutting out their insides. For him, it was a ritual, almost a form of creativity. Narcissism and megalomania. He demonstrated a sense of superiority over others, considered himself smarter than the investigators, and in conversations with the police and journalists, he behaved like a character from a novel, a dual persona. In public, Martynov seemed quiet, polite, and even gallant, and he knew how to evoke sympathy and trust. But in everyday life, he turned into a cruel and unstable aggressor, especially when he was drunk. Hatred towards women, especially towards lonely, drinking, vulnerable women. He justified his actions by their worthlessness, as if he was carrying out a cleansing. Lack of stable moral convictions. Well, it's clear here, he used any ideology as a tool. In Afghanistan, Islamism, in Russia, a pretense of faith, but in essence, he only believed in himself. As for possible diagnoses, these are preliminary, of course, without any official diagnosis. This is an antisocial personality disorder, sadistic personality disorder. Although it is not included in current classifications, it is clinically relevant. A mixed type of disorder with features of psychopathy and malignant narcissism. PTSD with pronounced antisocial manifestations. After Afghanistan. Alcoholism and sex. I don't even know how to say it. In short, addiction. As a result of using various illegal substances, which increases behavioral disorganization, possibly even paraphilia. A sexual component of violence in several episodes, including necrophilia. In general, Martynov is a classic example of an organized serial killer with a pronounced sadistic component and pathological contempt for his victims. His crimes were not exclusively sexual, but almost always had a ritualistic nature as an act of total domination over the weak. He played God, deciding who deserved to live and who did not. For the first few years after his imprisonment, Sergey was in high demand among journalists who filmed various stories about him and conducted numerous interviews, etc. I'll remind you, I'll leave the materials in Telegram, or you can find them online yourself. But over time, interest in Martynov faded, even though he tried to stir it up by expressing his willingness to show where more victims of his unsolved crimes could be found. As for the experts, they were divided in their opinions, whether Sergey Martynov could be called a maniac or if he should be considered a serial killer without any maniacal motives. As for his inclinations, his sexual ones at least, it was definitely established that most of his crimes did not have a sexual motive. Martynov could take anyone's life simply because he didn't like a rude word said to him, which the criminal himself admitted both during interrogations and in conversations with psychiatrists. Most often he committed his crimes while drunk because it was in that state that he lost control of himself. Most often the victims of Martynov, who is also called the Cleaner, although I have a separate video about the Cleaners gang on the Strashnota channel. By the way, it's a tough one. I recommend watching it. Strashnota. Cleaners? You probably need to type it in to find it. So most often his victims were women of middle age who led a chaotic and antisocial lifestyle. Martynov himself said during interrogations that he hated this type of person and was helping them get rid of their boring and worthless lives faster, and was helping the world get rid of people like them. In other words, he even tried to justify his crimes in some way, building a socially oriented theory to excuse his own atrocities. But now he has no one left to practice on, and the criminal complains that he will lose his skills. This is a literal quote from him, recorded in the high-security prison White Swan, where he is held in solitary confinement. No one is placed in the cell with the maniac, because for him, any cellmate would become his next victim. He misses committing crimes and craves them passionately. In one of his last interviews, Martynov says, smiling at the journalists, that he is not afraid of death and has seen all kinds of it in his lifetime. Dying, he says, is simple, very simple. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the Strashnota channel. They come out, even though you don't always get notifications about it. By the way, to get them, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell